All right. Welcome, everyone. As people come in, just 30 more seconds before starting. Thank you for being here. All right. So I guess it's a good time to start. I mean, I have your confirmation that you're looking at the first slide of my presentation. Okay, thank you. All right, so let me just get started. Okay, thank you everyone for coming today to this presentation. Actually coming probably to your living room from your bedroom. But anyway, we are here, and this is does differential privacy hold the key to unleashing data marketplaces? This is part of a research project that I'm currently carrying out with my colleague Gehan Gunasekara from the Commercial Law Department. And today I'll be presenting along with my doctoral student, Monxiao Zhang, and let's see how it goes. We are looking at about 35 minutes, followed by questions. I invite you to use the chat to write your questions, or if you want to just speak up at the end of the presentation, we'll be happy to engage in the discussion. All right, so what is this talk about? Well, this is about how data marketplaces work. We want to identify issues that may impede data marketplace to be efficient. And we want to bring here a new approach to privacy protection, which is actually called differential privacy. So who is using it and how? Later, I'll be talking about data as a public good and the application of the differential privacy to the role or the job that a national statistics agency has to do. In the second part of the talk, will be Monxiao will be talking about our own work, which is focused on trading network data as opposed to a regular tabular data set. This is network data and some problems, interesting problems that we have found there. All right, so in a website by the consulting company AI Multiple, we find this definition of data marketplace. It's a platform. It's a platform where users buy or sell different types of data sets and data streams. And this is basically done through cloud services. That website also mentions a report by Forrester from last year that was commissioned by Pitney Bowes. And all I want to highlight here is that some impressive figures about the importance of data to organizations, large and small. And in particular, that many businesses are turning to online data marketplaces for the data they need. The website talks about three types of marketplaces: personal, business, and sensor. Here, this presentation is about personal data marketplaces where consumers attempt to monetize their data. But the exchange of data by businesses is also another type of marketplace, probably more popular in the sense, more important in terms of revenue and and the size of the industry. But there's another newer one, type of data marketplace, which is the one where data from sensors and machines are coming to be exchanged to those other machines that need them. So it's a sort of machine-to-machine data marketplace. All right, Gartner last year released a report, and it says that about 35%, about a third of large organizations will be sellers or buyers of data via formal online data marketplaces. And this is an interesting, important figure. And they also call the attention to data and analytics leaders to establish a fair and transparent methodology by defining a data governance principle. This is in line, totally in line with our own project. Okay. Now, what is a data marketplace? Well, this slide can show you how it works. A data buyer comes to the data marketplace, which is managed by the broker, in search for information from data sets. Let's focus on queries. So the data buyer is running a query and it has a budget. On the other side, there are data sellers who are the owners of the data. They expect a payment for the data. In between, the data broker is supposed to run a mechanism, which we're going to call a mechanism for solving the trading, where data queries are being sent in. Now, buyers, of course, no less than sellers. This is an information asymmetry problem there. And also, the sellers need assurance that the data is protected. The privacy of the data is protected. All right, so what are the issues in general? One important one is de-identification. So this is a way by which data sets strip off the identification, the ID of the people, of the person who is the owner of the record. And that has been done for a long time in the hope that people are not recognized, cannot be identified. But then we have, well, that there are other people, hackers or adversaries, who are on the search for re-identifying. Once they get their hands into data, they want to re-identify. There's one technique that has been used extensively called K-anonymity for protection of identity. And it has been found that it's not enough. So that's one of the questions we want to address here. Now, on the other hand, people may be willing to sell their data, but they need assurance that their data is protected. And one of the questions in our research project, not answered, not addressed in this particular talk, is that whether the willingness to sell increase with the assurance of identity protection. That's an underlying question for our research, but we are going to give a little bit of light on that. All right, so in 2011, the researcher who has been identified as the person who brought differential privacy first time back in the mid-2000s was asking in a very interesting paper that what does it mean to preserve privacy and how can it be implemented? She was referring, she referred to statisticians in the late 70s by the name of Delenius, who established a sort of a goal for this. We said anything that can be learned about a respondent from a statistical database should be learnable without access to the database. And this was in line with what happened in cryptographic methods. So cryptography it has that flavor, the flavor behind this principle. But people working on data re-identification or protection of privacy, they found this a bit problematic. And the problem was that basically that principle or that goal is saying the following. It's saying, if I have some beliefs about the people in the database, my prior beliefs before interacting with the database, once I interact with the database, my posterior beliefs should be roughly the same as the previous or prior beliefs. And that's not exactly what happens in reality. Once you interact with the data, once with the database, once you learn that is not what happens. So she proposed a different way to look at the problem. And she said, well, let's not focus on that. Let's focus on the people whose identity is under threat. So what the goal became was minimize the risk to an individual incurred by joining or leaving the database. And that led to what we know today as differential privacy, which is basically ensuring the ability of an adversary to learn about an individual in a database that is essentially the same, independent whether the individual is in or out of the database. Okay, so let's look at this a little bit in more detail to get to the definition of the differential privacy. So formally, we have a data set, and that data set is going to be affected by a mechanism run by the data broker or whoever is providing the answers to the queries. So the answer is going to be a polluted answer. Now let me just bring an example. Suppose that I want to run a survey about who voted, whether or not people voted for a particular candidate in the last election. So I'm going to ask you that question, which is sensitive information. So let's call it the sensitive question. So I'm going to ask you that, but instead of asking you directly whether you voted or not, it's a yes or no question. I'm going to bring another question, which is an innocuous question. Say, do you like broccoli or whatever? And I'm going to put these two questions in an envelope separately, in separate envelopes. A portion of the many envelopes will be with the sensitive question. The rest will be envelopes with the innocuous question. And I will hand it over to you. And you will reply to that answer, to the question. You know what question you were asked. I don't know. And you provide the answer. That's exactly a very good example of what differential privacy does in a very small example like this. It is called the randomized response, and it originated in the 1960s. Of course, the parameter that the researcher has at hand here is the proportion of envelopes with the sensitive question, or the probability that you will be handed over the sensitive question. But at large, if we have data sets, and in general, suppose we have two data sets, and they are very similar, except perhaps for one record, one single record that is not in one data. In all other aspects, the two data sets are exactly the same, except for one record. And we're going to call those data sets neighbors. So let's use that setup to bring the definition of differential privacy. So that mechanism that is answering the query is called epsilon differential private, with the epsilon being a positive number. If for any pair of those the neighboring data sets, the probabilities of that the query made on those data sets are very similar. The probabilities are very similar. And that is expressed in the following expression. Now, let's just rearrange this, and this is a better way to put it. So we have two data sets providing an answer each through the mechanism. And this is a ratio, which can be greater than 1. Now, we want to bring that ratio as close to 1 as possible. And we can do it by controlling the epsilon. If epsilon is in a very small number, that e to the epsilon, that's the exponential function, is going to be close to 1. So by managing epsilon, I can bring these two very close. Of course, the smaller it is, the smaller epsilon is, the more problems I'm going to have with another aspect that is important. But I hope that you get the idea here, is that if the two probabilities are very similar, which means this ratio is close to 1, then there's no, I wouldn't know if the answer came from the database with that individual or without that individual. That's differential privacy. So we've been working on this, and as a sort of a preliminary work or a work on the side, we have been doing some review of literature and finding how big companies use differential privacy. And this is what we found, and this paper that is almost available. Yeah, I think we have a decent version now. And one of those companies that we look at is Google. So let me just tell you a bit about what Google does. And Google is doing, from 2014, Google released something called the Randomized Aggregatable Privacy Preserving Ordinal Response. That's a tool for developers who want to incorporate differential privacy. Now, 5 years later, in 2019, they allow access to the public through the Differential Privacy Library. And last year, they did it. They enhanced it with Go and Java. And this tool is built on Apache Beam. It has an interesting tool as well that keeps track of the cost to user privacy when many queries are made on the data set, because one of the things that happen is that privacy can start leaking, so to speak, the more queries one does in an attempt to try to find more information. But that can be also controlled. The privacy loss distribution tool supports mechanisms such as randomized response, which is the example I gave you a while ago, and Laplace, which is one that Monziao is going to be using in a couple of minutes. All right, so how about data as a public good? So changing the landscape, we're not dealing with private data now. Let's talk about public data. Data is storing statistical data in databases, for instance. As queries are made on those databases, each record is identified with a particular individual, and accuracy is very important. The queries must be accurate, but because of the mechanism we're using, there's going to be a difference between the noisy query answer and the real query answer, and that is a measure of the accuracy or lack of. Two parameters are important. Two variables here are the most relevant. First of all, the accurate statistics, we denote it as I, and the privacy or privacy loss, we denote it with epsilon. So those are the two. Now, individuals are querying in the database. Now, several things are interesting to notice about this setup. Privacy models help interpret privacy protection as a commodity over which individuals have preferences. And this brings us to the two variables that we're using here: statistical accuracy and privacy protection, to be considered as public goods. In particular, when data publication mechanisms are available to whoever is releasing this, those must be endowed with some bound on privacy loss measured by epsilon and a level of statistical accuracy. So those are the two things. The statistical agency is seeking to maximize the social welfare. So basically, this is a social choice. Now, in a paper from 2019, John, about who is the chief scientist at the Census Bureau and also a professor of Cornell University, has a paper, wrote a paper, and that paper is quite interesting, and I want to finish my part with that. In it, they basically state that statistical agency must choose a guarantee. The statistical agency must choose a guarantee bound on everyone's privacy loss, right? So the analysis goes like, Although we know that any query in the census data sets will leak some information, and this may erode privacy to some degree, privacy loss must be limited. Now, the query must be accurate, but we know that a random mechanism will pollute the real answer. So the Census Bureau, like any other statistic agency, would have to decide what level of privacy loss to allow and what level of accuracy to guarantee. Basically, finding on the privacy loss accuracy plane, what is that pair, but that will turn out to be optimal. If the agency is acting on behalf of society, it must maximize the benefits. And all this means that it has to maximize a function of social welfare, and in doing so, choose the optimal accuracy and privacy loss levels, as long as those levels are found on the production frontier. Unfortunately, no solution is known for general queries. But for specific queries, for instance, for count queries, which is one of the most basic queries, count queries, about shows that at optimality, the solution must be such that the marginal rate of transformation on the left, as you can see on the screen, must equal the marginal rate of substitution on the right. But what does this mean? Well, this is interesting. It means that the marginal cost to the agency of increasing accuracy in terms of foregone privacy must be equal to society's willingness to accept privacy loss, measured in units of accuracy. For instance, given the agency knowledge of the specific query of interest and the applied differential privacy method, let's see that on the screen. You can see that the agency would determine the production frontier and solve it for the highest possible value of social welfare. That's it. Then it finds the sought levels of accuracy and privacy loss, as shown in the red circle. Well, this is a kind of a simple case, but this illustrates what it has to be done. This is a typical problem in economics. So in our own research, we are now investigating this problem for specific queries other than count queries. And we are also investigating alternative, more suitable functional forms of social welfare. Okay, so far so much for the literature. Let me now give it to Monziao, who will talk about what we have done.
Hey, Fernando, could you please allow me to share the screen?
Certainly, I'm sorry, I should have done it some time ago. Just a second.
Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry, I cannot do that. Can you double check it? Oh, I'm the host. Oh, yeah, I can do that right now. Okay, cool. Okay, thank you, Fernando. Well, Fernando has talked about the case the data are treated as public good. Here, I'm going to talk about the case when the data are treated as private good. Also, here I'm going to, most of the studies are focused on the tabular data side, but here I'm going to introduce another data type that is the network data. Well, nowadays actually the social media such as Facebook, Twitter, Weibo has become an integrated part of our daily life. And we communicate with each other on these social media platforms. So these platforms has become important data sources, and it contains information, for instance, like our preferences, tastes, interests, and friendships. Obviously, this information are private information, and the social media users should demand for the privacy protection and the privacy compensation. So here, I'm going to introduce a mechanism that sets the prices of social network data while still preserving the data privacy of the social media users. Well, the first question is how to represent a network. Network often looks like this, and here we use undirected and unweighted graph to represent such a social network. And graph is consisting of a set of nodes, and each of the nodes represents the represent a user of the social network, and also it is consisting of a set of edges, and each of them is a connection between a pair of nodes in the node site, and each of them represent the, for instance, the relationship between two nodes. Then what kind of information can we get from such a network? We may count the number of users, or we can count the number of friendships. Also, we can learn how dense the network is. So here we just focus on a specific query type, that is the to count the number of friendships of this network, or the age count query. Here we use a variant version of differential privacy. It is known as node differential privacy. The basic idea of node differential privacy is to ensure that no one can infer actual information from the existence of any a particular node. And the node differential privacy is defined on the node neighboring graphs. Here, the node neighboring graphs means that the two graphs that differ at most on one node. And for instance, this is original graph. We can get its node neighboring graph by removing node 2 and all its edges. Then we can get its node neighboring graph, graph B. Or we can just remove some of its edges, and we can also get its node neighboring graphs. Also, we can just add a new node and its edges to the original graph to get a node neighboring graph. And for any pair of node neighboring graphs, and for any possible query answer set, the query answer derived from the node neighboring graphs are very close from a probabilistic sense. So we can see that this query mechanism is node differential privacy. Then how to achieve the node differential privacy? The very basic idea, as Fernando has introduced, is to add the Laplace noise to the query answer. Here, the Laplace noise is actually a random number joined from the Laplace distribution. As shown in this figure, there are some examples of the Laplace distribution with different parameters. Here, the parameter of the Laplace noise, the Laplace noise level, or the parameter of the distribution, is actually determined by the sensitivity of a query function. Here, the sensitivity of a query function means the maximum change of a query function value caused by the change of a node. So we can see that actually to preserve privacy on networks is more difficult. For instance, this is the original graph, and we can get its node neighboring graph by adding a new node. It is possible that this node makes connections to all the existing nodes. So if we conduct some queries, such as the edge count query, the sensitivity of such a query function is actually equal to the graph size. And we know that the Laplace noise is actually proportional to the graph size. So if we add the when the graph size is very large, then the noise would be if the noise is proportional to the graph size, then it would be too much, which will definitely compromise the accuracy of the query answer. So it's not what we want. Actually, what we want is to get the accurate query answer while still preserving the privacy of the network. So we proposed our mechanism to address the problem. And Fernando has introduced the basic idea of this framework. Specifically, our mechanism is consisting of two mechanisms. One is a procurement mechanism, and the other is the query mechanism. The procurement mechanism is used to determine whom to buy data from, and the query mechanism is used to answer the question, what is the degree of the graph? To be specific, firstly, the procurement mechanism gets the data valuations from the data sellers and the budget from the data broker. According to some predefined rules, the procurement mechanism returns the payment result and the allocation result. Then, according to the allocation result, the query mechanism collect the data from the selected data sellers, and it conduct a query on the sample network composed of the selected data sellers, and then it adds some Laplace noise to the query answer, and at last returns the noisy query answer to the data broker. As you can see here, there are two causes for inaccuracy. First is that due to the budget, the procurement mechanism may not be able to afford to buy data from all the data sellers. So the data query is actually just to get a sample network. And the query is conducted on the sample data site. Further, the query mechanism, to preserve the privacy, the query mechanism add some noise to the query answer on the derived from the sample network, which will further compromise the accuracy of the query answer. So we are going to address these two problems. Firstly, we make the sample network close to the authentic one by buying data from as many data owners as possible within the budget. Also, we bound the noise by setting a threshold to the degree of all nodes. For instance, here is the original graph. If we conduct the edge count query on this original graph, you can see that the graph size is 5 and the sensitivity would be 5, so the noise would be very large. Then if we set the threshold at 3, then we can just remove some edges, and we got a graph that that is with the degree bounded by 3. Now, if we conduct the edge count query on this bounded degree graph, we can find that the sensitivity is bounded by the 3. In such a way, we can bound the noise and since increase the accuracy. And we are going to use this idea in our design. This is the detailed design of our mechanism. Firstly, after getting the reported valuations from all data owners, firstly the procurement mechanism sorts the valuations in an ascending order, and it found the largest value of k, such that if we pay the first k data owners with k's valuation, the total payment is still within the budget. Then we select the first k data owners and pay each of them the minimum value between the budget divided by k and the smallest rejected valuation, or the k+1 valuation. So then the query mechanism collects the data from the selected data owners, and the data of the selected data owners compose a sample graph. Then the query mechanism conduct two numbers. The first one is to compute the noisy degree of the sample graph, And the second is to compute the noise degree of the boundary degree sample graph. And then we compare the two estimates with the expected value and returns the more accurate one as the final answer. So as we shown here, we have addressed the privacy and the accuracy problem at the same time. Then I would like to summarize the desirable properties of our mechanism so that we can appreciate that how powerful the idea is. Actually, our mechanism can address the information asymmetry problem. Firstly, it can ensure that the data owners would report their valuations truthfully. That is because reporting either a value lower or higher than their true valuation cannot lead to a higher extra benefit. So they will just report their true valuations. Further, we ensure that all the data owners will never get negative utility. For the data owners who are not selected, they will not be paid and they will not lose anything. So their their utility is zero. But for the selected data owners, their payment will never be lower than their reported valuation. So their utility will never be negative. At last, we can ensure that the total payment will never exceed the budget because we just selected the first K data owners within the budget. And last is about the privacy and accuracy guarantee. So that's a summary of the desirable properties of our mechanism. Thank you for your listening.
All right. Thank you, Monsieur. For those of you who may be interested in some of the references, I'm going to leave them there for 1 or 2 minutes. But anyway, if you have any questions, please, I don't see any at the moment on the chat. But feel free to type it or just unmute yourself. All right. Okay, so it seems like there's no questions today. All right, so just a final word. The Faculty Research Development Fund has been, through the research committee of our faculty, has been generous to award us this grant, and this is the second year of the project. What we presented today is just one aspect of it. We are at the moment focusing on the main question, which is what is the value of personal data, or how to assess the value of personal data. It's a question that's related to what we have listened today about how data marketplaces work. We're interested in finding out attitudes and preferences of people. So we've been conducting lab experiments since last year and this year as well. And so far we have an important amount of data that we are analyzing at the moment, with having in mind that to get towards our goal, we still need to go through a series of other experiments that we'll be conducting in the next months, just previous to finishing the project by the end of the year. So that's pretty much what we're doing. And again, if there's any reactions or questions, we're gonna stop here. Is that okay? All right. So thank you for coming today. Enjoy today. It's a beautiful day in Auckland. Andres, please don't leave. Stay with me after everyone is gone. And thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.